Hi, I'm Larry Dignan, and we're here with Jeff Nelson, CTO and co-founder of Blavity. It's a website covering social justice, news, lifestyle, bunch of other things. Hi, Jeff. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Larry, thanks for having me.
So, I guess walk me through at a high level what Blavity is and how you got started.
So, Blavity aims to connect the world to Black culture through experiences that transcend digital and physical spaces. So, what does that mean? It means that first and foremost, we are an information sharing and content sharing platform. And we've got 5 different websites where we do that. So, we have Blavity News, which focuses on politics and general news. We have Afrotech, which focuses on business, entrepreneurship, and professional development. We have Travel Noir, which focuses on travel, as the name suggests. 2190 focuses on women's health and empowerment, and Shadow and Act focuses on films and media. In addition to those media properties, we put on the biggest tech conference in the world for Black millennials called Afrotech. In addition to Afrotech, we put on a number of bespoke events throughout the year as well. So our aim at Blavity is really to, one, bring Black people together to consume and share content, but also to bring that content to the rest of the world in a way where Black people maintain ownership, authority, and share in the benefits of the world reaping, enjoying that content. We got started in 2014. We were founded by a group of my colleagues from Washington University in St. Louis. We've been going strong for the last 7 years.
So, as far as the model goes, you mentioned events. So, I guess it's events, advertising. I guess what's the business model look like?
Yeah, that's the business model. So events are one source of revenue. And then in addition to that, we monetize our content through advertising. And really, I like to think of it as a two-sided marketplace where we bring a readership to bear based on the content that we provide. And we also bring that readership to our advertisers and partners because they want to reach that demographic. So they do that on our media websites, but they also sponsor our events. And the reason they sponsor our events and really the Blavity value proposition throughout our ecosystem is that our readership and our users are so engaged because there is this continuum of digital and in person. Now, obviously, the COVID-19 pandemic is to sort of rock that on its heels, but historically, what we've been able to do is really allow people to connect online and digital spaces and then have these moments of organic in-person interaction that's really been magical. And our partners want to be a part of that. So they sponsor our events and they support us through advertising on our media properties as well.
So you've coupled those things together as a model as opposed to here's the advertising channel, here's the events channel.
Yeah, we find that it's just much more effective, especially for our demographic, because the digital side of things allows us to scale, but the in-person really makes it something that is sticky and makes it where our readers want to continue to support us and come to Blavity as the trusted source for their news and information, and come to our events for experiences that are unlike any other.
So, as far as you've been around since 2014, you've raised some venture funding. I guess walk me through the continuum as, from a bootstrap company to, what you are today.
Yeah, so we have raised some venture funding, and that's one of the things that's really difficult for a company that has Black founders and is led by a woman. Our leadership is tremendous. I think that we have the best CEO of any company out there. And it's been hard for us to raise venture funding. And I think that speaks to the disparity that so many others have spoken about when it comes to women-led and Black-led startups raising funding. And so what we had to do early on for the first several years is bootstrap. In addition to bootstrap, we had to find creative ways to generate revenue. I mean, I remember early on, we had something called Blavity.shop. Literally, one of the founders' moms would like knit gear. She was very into knitting. She would knit sweaters and beanies and caps and scarves and things like that. And we'd sell that. We'd sell that on Blavity Shop just to find ways to generate some revenue and allow us to hire additional writers or to experiment with different marketing strategies and scale up. And fortunately, we were able to get some organic traffic. We took a risk in 2016 when we decided to start Afrotech. Not 2016, but 2015 when we decided to start Afrotech and throw this conference. And we had never done anything on that scale before. And it was fortunately successful. The first year it was 800 people, then it grew to 3,000 people, then it grew to 6,000, then over 10,000 people. So we've been able to, as I like to say, hustle, take some strategic bets, experiment with a bunch of things, figure out what sticks, and then double down on those and scale them up.
So I guess walk me through the transition to where, all right, so you had to bootstrap, you had to get really creative. You basically stood up a company on your own, and then here comes the VC funding of some sort. Right. How does that change the approach to the company? And, how did you reach that decision? Because, I know a few companies where they kind of look at the VC and the dilution and they're like, it's not worth it, especially if they've started up on their own and got to a certain scale. So I guess just walk me through that decision.
Yeah, so I'll tackle the first part of the how, and then I'll talk about the what it allowed us to accomplish. So the how is really a story, I think, of just the grit and determination of Morgan DeBaun, who's our CEO. I give her all the credit for leading the company and putting us in a position to raise VC funding. In 2017, we were in a position where Google Ventures led our first big, large round of financing. And Google Ventures is, you might think that the relationship between media and Google Ventures may seem somewhat off, but the reason that Google Ventures wanted to work with us is because they saw that was powering our scale and our unique ability to understand our audience is what we were doing with technology and data. So my background personally is in data, is in server-side architecture, technology, things of that nature. I built my own database system. So I bring that experience to bear. And we used a lot of that at Blavity to allow us to have a competitive advantage where we were able to scale up and do some things efficiently with relatively little in the way of funding early on. And so Google saw that and said, hey, they've got some secret sauce there. So Google led our first big round of financing. And what that did is that it just allowed us to scale up even further. And I think the challenge that a lot of startups face, and disproportionately what Black startups face because they don't receive that infusion of venture capital, is that it's very hard to scale, right? So it's not easy to start a company, but you can do it simply just based off of inertia and momentum and passion. And that gets you to a certain point, but then you sometimes hit that startup wall. And it's hard to continue on, it's hard to grow, it's hard to scale. And so that's what the venture funding allowed us to do. It allowed us to hire more people on the team. It allowed us to experiment. It allowed us to enter into new markets. But it also just gave us the credibility where we could go, quite frankly, to some additional partners for sponsorship of our events or to advertise on our media properties. And they would take the meeting because we were backed by Google Ventures. So that's what it did for us. And we were really fortunate in that regard.
So I guess walk me through the scale challenges. I mean, this is something that, we talk to a lot of SMBs, we talk to large enterprises, and scale is the one common denominator nobody seems to get right. So, yeah. or it's the biggest thing they got to wrestle with.
Yeah.
So I guess walk me through, I assume given the timeline here of, launching the company in 2014, cloud had a lot to do with it. But just walk me through kind of the scale challenges.
Yeah, so scale challenges happen for a number of reasons. One, that you see not only in our case, but many startups, there's always this rush of how do you develop an MVP or a minimum viable product and just sort of get something to market. And inevitably, when you do that, on the technology side, you end up taking shortcuts, right? You don't build things optimally. You don't build things to scale because by definition, you're just trying to test a hypothesis, right? And so if you're fortunate and that catches on, you sort of find yourself in this position of, now we've 10x or 100x on users and we can't support this. How do we do it, right? And so it oftentimes feels like you're constantly playing catch up because you're trying to swap out the engine of the plane while you're flying it, so to speak, right? And so that's one of the challenges there with scale is just this idea of scaling in real time while trying to support, your core user base that has been there for a while, this expanding user base, but also think about the future potential as well. So that's sort of just the philosophical challenge of it. But in terms of the actual technical pieces of it, yes, it is how do you scale in a cost efficient manner, right? So, building things in the cloud has a lot to do with that. One of the things that at Blavity that's been part of our story is that early on as CTO, I made the decision that we were going to, use a microservice architecture, and we were going to invest in containerization. So, now Kubernetes and Dockerizing things, that's sort of the standard norm. But you can think in 2015, 2016, when we were having these conversations, those technologies were fairly new, and we decided to bet on those. And the reason is because we ended up having a lot of technical debt, both because of the phenomenon that I talked about previously, where you just build things quickly and inefficiently to get it to market. But in addition to building platforms ourselves, we also acquired companies early on. So Travel Noir, one of our platforms, we acquired that company. Shadow and Act, one of our platforms now, we acquired that company as well. So we had platforms that we built in-house in addition to platforms that we acquired, and we were integrating those technology stacks. So we were in a position where we had all these media properties in all divergent code bases, all different technology platforms. So it was incumbent upon us early on to build microservices that we could sort of reason about and think about in isolation, and then bring those to each of our properties when appropriate, so they could perform these common functions, and we could sort of have a single source of truth for that one piece of the pipeline.
So how fast did it take you to get technical debt?
I think we had technical debt on like week one, right? I mean, that's just sort of the reality. And part of when you are a startup, in the startup phase, when you're building things, you can have a CTO that is in the weeds and technical writing code, but you're often going to be relying on contractors. You're going to be outsourcing some of the work. You're not necessarily going to go through a long interview process to figure out, a potential developer's style and philosophy. You're not going to document coding practices and best practices for the code base. You're not going to do those things. So you end up, by virtue of the speed at which you're starting, incurring technical debt in real time. So we had it almost immediately. And as I mentioned before, in acquiring the companies that we did, that introduced more technical debt. And we try to sort of dig out of the hole at any opportunity that we have. But I don't know any successful company that doesn't have technical debt. I mean, that's part of the game. And that's also sometimes part of the fun, is that you always get to go back and revisit what's working and figure out how you can make it better and solidify it a bit.
So is the microservices bet based on absorbing those acquisitions, or was it just an architecture decision where it just looked like a better way to work? Because it's developed so much since.
Yeah. So for me early on, it made so much sense. And it really comes from the way that I like to think about technology, right? It's, my background in computer science and specifically focused on database and back-end development. I've always found that when you have a big monolithic system, one, when it breaks, everything breaks, right? But then two, it's just so hard to reason about it because there are so many assumptions that have been baked into that system. And it's just very hard to wrap your head around, well, here's one tiny bug here, but if I kind of, change this line of code, or I change the inputs to this method, then I don't even know, I can't even begin to assess the impact that it's going to have. So that just inevitably slows down your ability to iterate. It makes it much more difficult for you to fix bugs, and it just increases risk, which means that you're going to spend more money on testing, you're going to spend more money on support, and you're going to take longer to do these things. So early on, it just made a lot of sense to me, knowing that we were a startup, knowing that we're going to be in an environment where, relative to startups that aren't led by Black founders or led by women, it's going to be harder for us to raise money, that we just had to be much more judicious in our resources. So we had to build our technology in a way that just simplified things, and allowed us to approach each individual piece and understand what the assumptions are, understand what the breadth was, and then do the work to integrate and use them appropriately.
Yeah, that's interesting because microservices is always talked about in the perspective of scale.
Mhm.
It's never talked about as a way to like make your budget go farther.
Yeah, but it rings so true when you think about it. Yeah.
So, okay. And in terms of your challenges now, like you're looking ahead, your technology roadmap, the sites, what keeps you up at night?
So what keeps me up at night is just the competitive landscape. Uh, you know, how do we build more moats that allow us to maintain a competitive advantage? So the core of what we do is information and content. That is what makes us money. That's what our audience comes to consume. That's what our partners and advertisers pay to have their products featured on. And so ultimately, it's about how can we use technology in a way to, one, make that experience better for our users so that they trust Blavity. They continue to trust Blavity to do that. And that's just, one, for us as a competitive advantage, but also two, the internet, for better or for worse, has made it very easy for anyone to put information out there. And oftentimes that information isn't necessarily accurate, right? And so I think we have an opportunity and a responsibility to be an arbiter of truth and accuracy and reliability in information. And so we want to make sure that we continue to build moats so that we maintain that credibility and that authority. And then just the last part I'll say on this piece is, again, how do you do that in a way that is financially efficient and nimble with respect to resources? Because we are a tech-enabled media company, the media comes first, and the media is what's monetized. So if you look at a traditional tech company where the tech is the direct product, then they have engineering teams that are in the hundreds or in some case thousands of people because the engineering team is a driver of revenue. Well, in a tech-enabled media company, the engineering team is a supporting function, right? We provide the platforms and the resources that allow the content teams and the advertising and sales teams to generate revenue. So we're a supporting function. So our teams are going to be smaller. We don't have 100 engineers. I mean, we've got less than 10 engineers on our team, even 7 years in. So we've got a very nimble team. So what keeps me as the CTO up at night is just making sure that we're using those resources effectively, that we're getting the most out of the team as possible, but we're also not burning anyone out, and we're continuing to invest in their own personal development and mental health so that they feel appreciated.
So, how has 2020 changed the approach of how you hire, remote work, and all that sort of thing?
I think that it's allowed the appreciation and just the understanding of the feasibility of remote work to permeate throughout the rest of the company. So for our engineering team, we've largely been remote since the beginning. So for instance, the company is headquartered in Los Angeles and I live in Atlanta. I've always lived in Atlanta. So I've always been sort of a remote executive. And because of that, we've had engineers who were based in Los Angeles, some who were based in Atlanta, others who were based in other parts of the country, and even in some cases in other parts of the world. And that's been a part of our DNA for a long time. So when 2020 happened and we sort of had to instantly turn on a dime and go remote, the engineering team was able to step up and show some leadership and teach the rest of the company how we do it efficiently, how we're able to have work streams that are asynchronous, how we're able to foster collaboration when necessary, how we're able to build a remote culture where people feel like they're, in the trenches together and they're working towards a common goal, but they also have the flexibility to work in a way that makes sense for them.
Yeah, my team was always remote too.
Mhm.
So the transition was pretty easy because we're global and spread out all over the place. But I got to tell you, I cannot wait for my coworkers to go back to the office.
It's weird. I used to really like the idea of just never having to go to the office, but some days I'm like, man, I really just kind of want to get up and drive to an office or fly and
yeah, or just drop in.
Yeah,
the other weird thing was just all the newbies to remote working, just killing me, man. It was just like, just too much.
Always greener.
Exactly. So I guess walk me through. You just launched a fellowship program, and what caught my eye was just that it's focused not only on entrepreneurs and Black-run companies, but was also focused on, you know, the things we just talked about, the things about scale and all those things you probably don't think about out of the gate. So I guess walk me through what you're hoping to do.
So we launched a nonprofit this year called Blavity.org, and our first initiative is this growth fellowship. And we emphasize the fact that it's growth because one of the things I've talked about is this idea that starting a company is something that you can do, and momentum and excitement and just the exhilaration of this vision you have is going to take you to a certain point. But then it's going to get hard. You're going to hit this wall where survival is dependent upon the ability to grow and scale. And one of the things we find is that only 4% of Black founders reach the growth phase of their company. And that statistic is just way too low. And so the thing that me and my co-founders have always been passionate about is thinking about a way that we can distill our journey and the things that have given us success and the learnings that we've acquired and pass that on in a very tangible way. And so we started the Growth Fellowship. It is a 6-month program, and we're going to give each of the companies, we have 12 companies that have been selected across 3 different verticals. So we've got traditional venture backable startups. We've got creatives that encompass journalists, artists, and storytellers, as well as product and retail companies as well. And what we're doing is we're putting them through a 6-month program that's going to give them tools and technology to help them scale and be more efficient. We're going to give them mentoring and coaching. And then lastly, they're going to get $10,000 in non-dilutive capital. And that part is so important to me because when you brought this up earlier with VC and the dilution, and a lot of times people gloss over that phenomenon. When you do raise the money, you're giving up a part of your company, and that's not a trivial matter. One of the things that was important for us is that we wanted to figure out a way to inject capital into Black startups that was going to make a difference, but we wanted them to keep as much ownership as possible and reap as many rewards from their hard work and success when they did grow and scale as possible. So that's why this grant is non-dilutive, and we're very, very proud of that fact.
All right. I think that's all I had. Is there anything I didn't ask that I should have? Any final points you want to make?
Yeah, well, I just appreciate the opportunity to tell the story, and go to Blavity.org to learn more about the fellows. And I encourage your listeners, if you're in a position to support the mission that we have at Blavity.org, please do so. We would love the support to be able to grow and scale our ability to help these startups grow and scale. So Larry, I just appreciate the time. Thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for joining me. Good times.
Take care. Bye-bye.